Well, hi, I'm Jeremy, speaking with you today from Berkeley, California. And very glad to have this opportunity to share some of my thinking with you. And thanks to Michael and Maria for inviting me. And above all, appreciation really to all of you who show, just by showing up today, being part of this conversation today, that you are caring and wanting to do something about this dire situation that we all know we're looking at in the world right now. And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today in this presentation, which is going to be looking at how did we get here? And I think some of the understandings about how we got here can help us to figure out some of the ways in which we need to change in order to change the direction of where we're headed. So bear with me for just one moment as I share the screen with my presentation here. And I'm going to make my image a little bit bigger and bring it down a little bit on the screen at the bottom here. And so this is what we're going to be talking about. How did we get here? And above all, how different conceptions of the universe shaped history and will shape our future. Well, we all know that the situation we're looking at is dire, otherwise you wouldn't be here today. But let's just take a quick look at how bad it really is. And well, this is a kind of a chart you're all probably familiar with about how temperatures are moving in one direction. We need to go right down the other direction, but even the pledges that countries are making aren't even being met, and they're moving in completely the wrong direction. And probably most of you are familiar with some chart that looks like this, that as the feedback on climate begins to kick in this century, we may be looking at temperature going way out of the zone that would be compatible with modern civilization. But even if we were to somehow magically fix the climate situation, we're looking at a far greater set of issues. That really climate is just a symptom of a much bigger problem we're looking at. So if we look at our home, the only place we know of in the universe where life exists and where humans have now become a dominant species on that earth, and if we look at how we've been treating the rest of life on earth, we've got an abysmal record. There's some of the statistics here. Half of all marine life has been lost in the last 40 years. The rainforests are disappearing all around the world. There's been a 60% decline in animal populations since 1970, just the lifetimes of some of the people in this room right now. That's being followed by an insect collapse around the world. In all different ecosystems, insects are disappearing. And the statistics go on and on. There's vast ecological destruction across the board. We're looking at 5 billion people facing water shortage by mid-century. The 6th great extinction of species, this one is human-caused. And the annihilation of coral reefs worldwide. And 95% of Earth's land is expected to be degraded by mid-century, according to the United Nations. But out of all these statistics, the one that just kind of blows me away the most, that I find it hardest to get my head around, is that by 2050, there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish. So the thing that's amazing about this is that this is all happening at a global production right now, about $92 trillion of GDP around the world. And mainstream economists are predicting that that number is going to be tripling by 2060, which makes us ask ourselves, how is that even possible? And that's obviously this key question: how did we get here? Now, I spent a fair amount of time looking at answering that question in this book I wrote, The Patterning Instinct, A Cultural History of Humanity's Search for Meaning. And one of the key themes of this book is that actually culture shapes values, and those values shape history. And by that token, our values, the values that we as a global civilization hold right now, will shape the future. This is a key issue because so many people wonder, is this just something about human nature, that we're just destined to be in this gigantic Greek tragedy and destroy ourselves and destroy the world in the same token. But my belief is that that's not the case. It's very much a sense of cultural choice and cultural values that will direct our future just as those directed the past. Now, that can be kind of an abstract notion to get our head around a little bit. So I'm going to begin with a little story and a riddle, if you will. And I call it the riddle of Admiral Zheng He and Christopher Columbus. Now, of course, all of you have heard of Christopher Columbus, but probably not many have heard of Admiral Zheng. But back in the 15th century, he was the greatest admiral in history. He set sail from China with the greatest armada the world had ever seen, 27,000 men and over 300 ships with amazing different classes of ships, even including freshwater tankers. And he went on 7 long voyages for nearly 30 years. And look at where he went, out of China, all the way to India, to Southeast Asia, the Middle East, East Africa, and wherever he went, he was treated like a god in some places. There's even temples devoted to worshiping him that can still be found in some places. And when he went to these places, though, he didn't enslave or conquer the populations. Instead, he asked the princes to send emissaries back to where he could take them to the Chinese emperor and have them sort of kowtow and extend a Chinese trade network throughout all of this whole Indian Ocean. Now, right around that same time, of course, as we know, in 1492, Christopher Columbus set sail from Spain. When he did so, it was with 90 men in 3 threadbare boats, one of which had its rudder break after 3 days at sea. And if you just look at the size of one of his boats compared to Zheng He's, you could have fit 10 of Columbus's in one of Zheng's, which leads to this riddle. Why did Columbus transform the entire world and not Admiral Zheng He? Now, I'm going to ask you to just hold this question in your mind as we look a little bit about some of these themes of how culture has shaped history. And then we'll come back to looking at some answers for that riddle. But the place to begin is really with this title of the book, The Patterning Instinct, because part of what I really discovered in this research I did is that we have a patterning instinct which drives human history. And we can call it a patterning instinct because even she has it. Nobody tells a newborn baby that you're meant to learn language, but she uses that patterning instinct to make sense of all the sounds and feelings she sees around her, and she uses it to learn language. And similarly, back hundreds of thousands of years ago, when humans first evolved in our current Homo sapiens, they would look around at the world and see an undifferentiated world, but they'd use that patterning instinct to make sense out of it. They'd see out of the stars, they'd put in constellations. And in the universe, they tried to discern historical patterns. Well, the first of those patterns was shared by our hunter-gatherer ancestors. We as humans spent about 95% of our history as hunter-gatherers, and they saw nature as a giving parent, everything being connected. And they saw all of life around them as being part of the big family of which they were part. That's changed about 10, 12,000 years ago with the rise of agriculture. And with agriculture, for the first time in history, came this notion of separation of the fields, the humans, culture, from the rest of the wild. Separation also between different humans. As people got to be more successful in cultivating, they would then hire other people who were less successful. Hierarchies began to develop. For the first time in human history, ideas about wealth and possessions and patriarchy became part of the human experience. And along with these hierarchies came a new way of patterning meaning into the universe, what we call a hierarchy of the gods. So just as a villager had to kowtow to the chieftain, similarly, they'd feel you need to sacrifice to the gods in order to sort of get their goodwill. And that pattern of meaning was shared by early civilizations around the world. And until about 2,500 years ago, when 2 previously unprecedented patterns of meaning arose in Greece and China. And let's look at the one in China first. There they took these ideas from the hunter-gatherers of the interconnected world, but they made a very sophisticated set of patterning and understanding of it. They looked at an interconnected cosmos of yin and yang, the sort of polar waves. And they saw all these interconnections, all this continual change as being part of what they called the Tao. And they would ponder, how do you, the idea of humans is to really be part of this Tao in the most harmonic way. So they would ponder what that meant. And as they looked at this, the pattern of meaning of the universe that they developed was what you might call a harmonic web of life. And we can think of it as a web in the sense that, imagine if you're in the woods and you see a web like that, and just one little drop would of water or a leaf hitting it would reverberate around the whole web. Similarly, they saw human activity in the cosmos. And that led to a set of values such as finding harmony as an ultimate goal within the cosmic network, resonating with the forces of yin and yang, and harmony arising through integration of the different parts of an individual, the individual within society, and with humanity and the natural world. But meanwhile, in ancient Greece, a very different worldview started up with this core concept of dualism. This is Plato, you see, pointing up to the sky, because his idea was that there's two dimensions to the universe, a fixed, perfect universe up there and a polluted world down below, and a split human along with that, with a perfect soul, with reason, and the polluted body down below. And that sense of dualism was inherited by Christianity. So we're often used to thinking about Christianity and science as being opposed, but actually Christianity served as an incubator for the scientific revolution, because they took this dualistic thought and they deified this idea of reason. So the early scientific revolution pioneers like Galileo, Newton, Kepler, etc., thought they were doing God's work and using their reason to understand this perfect universe that God had created. And this is a great picture that kind of shows this idea. This is Kepler's idea of how the planets must orbit around the sun, because each of them, he figured, had to follow a perfect shape, because God, making a perfect geometry, could only have done it in that way. Now, along with that idea of this perfect geometry of nature came this idea of God as a great clockmaker. Here, this is a medieval image of God creating the world like using a compass. And with that came this notion of humans being separate from nature and nature being a machine without any intrinsic value, but something to exploit. And you could use human rationality to not just exploit nature, but to conquer nature, which was this brand new idea that arose in the 16th and 17th century with people like Francis Bacon. And when the Europeans developed this idea of conquering nature and saw they were developing some success, they got excited at the idea of conquering not just nature, but conquering other continents too. This is this idealized image of Columbus arriving in the West Indies. But when Columbus actually did arrive in the West Indies with this mindset of conquering nature, this is what he wrote in his journal. At first, talking about how ingenuous the natives are. Of anything they have, he wrote, if you ask them for it, they never say no. Rather, they invite the person to share it and show as much love as if they were giving their hearts. But then his mind moves immediately on to exploitation. They would make fine servants, he says. Should your majesties command it, all the inhabitants could be taken away to Castile or made slaves on the island. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. And so this now gets us with a mindset to understand the answer to this riddle we were looking at earlier. So the answer is really this cultural cognitive underlay of making sense of the universe, that it would have been as unthinkable for Admiral Jones to have conquered and enslaved the societies he visited with his armada, as it would have been unthinkable for Columbus to have traded with the indigenous people and brought emissaries back to Spain as ambassadors, because of the cultural mindset they brought with them. And that cultural mindset that Columbus and others brought has now led to this globalized dominant culture with the greatest inequality in history, where the wealthiest 26 billionaires now own as much wealth as half the world's population. And we're extracting the resources to the very last dregs, even while we're continuing this totally unsustainable path we're on. So let's look a little bit more at those modern cultural patterns that we've inherited from that European way of thinking. Well, I think this image is iconic of our modern worldview, which is based on separation, connecting with technology, separate from each other, separate from the sources of the food that we're eating. And if we just look at just any time we might turn the TV on and see just a regular news show, well, we're being told at one level just whatever's happening with the money. At another level, these are the kind of messages we're being told, that we're all separate from each other, that we're all selfish. And that's actually great, because the way capitalism works is using everyone's selfishness to make the most efficient economy possible. We're being told that nature is a machine, and therefore technology has the solution to all of our problems, even somehow enabling us to grow infinitely on a finite planet. And oh, by the way, what we're really being told is everything is meaningless, so fill it with consumerism. And the aim of life is really to get as wealthy as possible, which leads to this unremitting growth that we're looking at that's driving us to collapse. So collapse of civilization is one scenario. And another scenario that I think people sometimes sneakily think is possible is equally morally disastrous, which is this idea of a fortress Earth, where a small minority of affluent people, mostly in the global north, separate themselves off from the rest of the world that's collapsing around them. So what's really the question then is, how do we get a different kind of direction? What's the sort of underlying way of thinking that could lead to a more sustainable worldview? Well, I think that one of the things we've learned, and what science is telling us now in the last few decades, is this understanding of nature as a complex system, where the connections between things are actually more important than the things themselves. The sense of everything being connected in non-linear ways. So like the flap of a butterfly's wing in Brazil, as one scientist asked, could potentially lead to a tornado in Texas, because we can't predict the non-linearity of how all these complex systems work. And that, of course, relates a lot to that Chinese worldview that we were looking at earlier, the sense of the harmonic web of life, where one drop of a movement here has all these impacts everywhere else. A connected worldview, a connected earth. And there's a set of values that arise from that connectedness, such as an emphasis on the quality of life rather than material possessions, basing political, social, and economic choices on our shared humanity, emphasizing justice and dignity for all, and building our civilization's future on the basis of environmental sustainability, where the flourishing of the natural world is a foundational principle. And that has led some of us to look at this notion of an ecological civilization. Of what we really need is to transform the very basis of our global civilization, from one that's wealth-based to one that's life-based, changing the fundamental cultural and economic systems to promote sustainable flourishing for humans and the earth. And that ecological civilization would have an underlying story that we are all interconnected in the web of life. Now, it's a major challenge to get to where we need to go. But my strong belief is that when enough of us are connected and understand the values that we need to change, it's doable. And I'm just going to get out of the screen share right now. If I can figure out how to do that. And just close by saying to you that I'm asking you really, as you look at these questions through the day, to think about them from that place of the underlying views, the underlying core metaphors and core constructions of values that you're using and that we all use and that we've inherited as we make sense of things. Think about how that infuses where we're going. And I understand that you're going to be hearing from Kate Rayworth, who I view as one of the great thought leaders of our world today in helping us think about what that kind of ecological civilization would be. And I look forward to speaking with you later on at a Q&A that I believe we have scheduled. So thanks very much for your time. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I look forward to speaking with you later. Bye.